Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans all around the world, welcome to another thrill-packed, information-loaded, data-downloading episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a world-renowned, world-famous, world-respected, almost award-winning comic book writer. You get to ask me what I do for a living, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. So let's get right down to it with some incredible questions this week. Charles Santino, just watched your latest video and you mentioned Neal's Green Lantern Green Arrow not selling. Have you ever read Bob Bierbaum's research into the affidavit return fiasco of the late 60s, early 70s? He contends and proves to my satisfaction that Neal on that book and on X-Men and Kirby's Fourth World books and Barry Smith on Conan were selling quite well, but the books never made it to the newsstands. Speculators were colluding with distributors and buying unopened bundles of these books for the secondary collector's market. Because the distributors were no longer required to send back the torn off cover or masthead as proof of an unsold copy, they were just required to assert on a document the numbers of unsold destroyed copies. They were now free to sell as many copies as they wanted to these dealers, often at well over cover price. The dealers would then turn around and sell copies to fans at 50 cents or more. Publishers couldn't understand why these titles had taken a nosedive. Conan was almost canceled, and when Big John took over the art, the dealers stopped buying extra copies. So from the publisher's view, the book was now selling much better than it had if Smith was drawing it. I don't, maybe I'm stupid, but if you're printing and selling a lot of copies, what difference does it make where they went or who bought them or if they went out on a secondary market? Now, I know for certainty. I mean, I was there. Early 70s conventions. You'd go there and dealers would have piles of the Fourth World books and Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and things like that. Astonishing amounts of these books because when people went to comic book conventions, they actually bought comics, even current comics. In fact, Jim Warren infamously would reprint his books for sale. So you thought you were buying Creepy 1, but you were buying a facsimile of Creepy number 1 that he had printed. But who cared? You just wanted to read it. It's not like he was charging you an extraordinary amount of money for them. But you go to his table and you go to other dealers' tables, and there would be, stacks, with hundreds of comics in each pile of the same comic. I think I might have bought Commandi number 1 that way. I've always heard about, one place in California was selling 1,000 copies of every Kirby Fourth World book. I saw that reported in a newspaper at the time. But somebody's going to have to explain to me. I understand about they used to tear off the covers, and now they don't tear off the covers. So are we saying that the retailers or distributors were lying to DC and saying the books were unsold when they weren't? Is that what we're saying here? Yeah, I guess that is what you're saying. So I guess, yeah, if that's the case, I'm thinking out loud here. That's how off the cuff this little program is that you're listening to or watching. I'm thinking, maybe that's what was going on here. That this wasn't a scam from the secondary comic market. This was a scam by the distributors and news agencies. So, and the news agencies had a history of, not always being quite cricket. about things, and sometimes often being political about things. That's why Blazing Combat was canceled. And I know this like from the horse's mouth. Blazing Combat was a terrific war comic that Warren Publishing was putting out, and along with Creepy and Eerie. And Creepy and Eerie are selling very well on the magazine stands, and they introduced this terrific war comic, probably one of the best American war comics produced. And it only ran 4 issues. And the reason for that was that the people in the union drivers who drove for the news agencies didn't like the fact that there was some, it wasn't anti-war, but the Vietnam War was portrayed probably not in the patriotic way that the unions wanted it to be portrayed. And if you were alive during that time, or if you weren't, I'm going to tell you, the unions were largely pro-Vietnam War. Construction unions, truck driving unions, things like that. This is back in the days when the rank and file of the unions was conservative, and the leadership of the unions was conservative, politically, socially conservative. And I think the rank and file of a lot of the trade unions are still largely conservative, but they objected, and so the later issues of Blazing Combat, issues 2, 3, and 4, never really made it to the newsstands. And I remember as a kid looking for them; they were very hard to find. I think I bought number 1 off the newsstand, and the rest of them I had to hunt for, and I think eventually buy either at a convention or through one of those comic book dealers in the back of they used to advertise in the back of Marvel and DC Comics. Very hard to find because they weren't distributed. So yeah, maybe that makes sense because it made no sense to cancel the Fourth World books because they were hugely popular. And I gotta say, even among fans, I saw a lot more of Kirby in that period. And this is, Kirby's move to DC, and he was doing all these titles. I saw a lot more Kirby at the conventions for sale in the secondary market than I ever saw of Green Lantern, Green Arrow. So I'm still going to argue that wasn't as popular as one would think. So, yeah, I don't know. That's something I got to look more into. I'm gonna do some research. I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. Okay, next question, Ulysses. I was reading a DC Finest collection of the 90s Catwoman drawn by Jim Ballant. I enjoyed it a lot. One thing I noticed while reading it is that suddenly, from one issue to the next, Jim's artwork got noticeably more dynamic, exciting, accurate, and polished. I checked, and the inker is the same. The only variable was a change of writer. The new writer is Mr. Chuck Dixon. I have to conclude that somehow it was your scripts which elevated Mr. Ballant's artwork. I've seen many times how an artist makes a writer's scripts better, but before this, never the other way around. My question is, how does a writer elevate an artist's game? My job as a writer is, I'm writing the script for the artist and the editor to see. And more as, I become more and more an independent creator, it's just me and the artist. So basically the script is a letter to the artist. This is what we want to do. This is what this panel looks like. Make sure you remember this and whatever. And part of my job, ultimately we're all going to engage the reader. We're all, me and the artist and the colorist and the letterer, we're all doing our best, and we're going to try to engage the reader and entertain them. But I've got to engage the artist first. So I kind of got to get him excited about the prospect of drawing this story. And you know, so there's to one degree or another a level of collaboration. I try to I like to know who's drawing my story. These days, I'm working with a lot of the same guys, so I'm either picking my artists or I'm working with guys I've worked with for years, or in the case of Joe Bennett, relatively. Our collaboration's relatively new, but we're prolific, and we've been turning out a lot of stuff, and we try to be on the same page with everything. So I try to engage, and also I provide a lot of reference material. Back in the day, when Jim Ballant was doing this stuff, I would I would either fax him pictures of things that I wanted in the story, or send him Xeroxes. I sent all my artists gun magazines on a regular basis, and I had this great book of this great picture book of food centers, food distribution centers, and it was a picture book for kids, and I picked up a whole bunch of them for like 50 cents a piece at some clearance sale at a bookstore, and I sent all of them out to people because I thought these are great locales, but I'm trying to work with the artists as much as possible and get them involved. So when I was working with Jim, I'm excited to work with Catwoman because it's heist stories, and I love heist stories. They're not easy to write, but I like writing them. And I liked working with Jim. Jim was a great guy. I got to meet him a lot at Bat Summits and up at the DC offices, and we got along great. Everybody gets along great with Jim. He's just a charming dude, but and a great storyteller, and in both comics and in person. So I remember when I first started writing with him. He was really happy. He really liked the stories because they were heist stories, and they weren't full of a lot of false drama and things like that. Because I contend that Catwoman, Selina Kyle, is like the happiest person in comics. Most comic book characters aren't very well adjusted, but she is. She's happy with her life being a thief. This is what she does. This is her job, and she's cool with it. And that was the approach I took, and Jim really liked that. And I remember after I left the title, because I was always the fill-in guy. They would, fire the Catwoman writer and then bring me in to write a few issues here and there. Because if you look at my quote-unquote run on Catwoman, it's pretty spotty. But I was always brought in when they were either behind or they needed a script in a hurry or whatever. And I was always more than happy to jump in and work with Jim. But I remember I left at one point and they hired another writer, and Jim called me and he said, "You should see the script I got." I wish you were still here. I wish you were still on this book. And one of the things he said that he's reading me the script, and the panel description is Catwoman blinks. And Jim's like, "How the hell do I make her blink? How do you blink in a comic book panel?" And I said, "Well, I guess it would take 3 panels. Eyes open, eyes closed, eyes open." But that's not really going to translate in the comics medium as a blink. So we had a good time talking about that. But yeah, he kind of missed me on the title, and I missed working with him. I missed writing Catwoman. But yeah, can a writer elevate an artist's work? Yeah, I guess if the collaboration is swinging. I remember the first time I worked with John Buscema, I was doing Savage Tales for Larry Hama, and I had written a Western, a 10-page Western that Larry actually didn't like. In fact, he called me on the phone and told me how much he hated it without acknowledging that I had written it, which was weird. He's complaining about this Western I wrote. And I was like, I don't like this, and I don't like that, and I don't like this, and this is awful. But he never once referred to me as the writer. It was like he was like complaining about me in third person or something. I don't know what he was doing. But I thought, okay, well, you're not buying that one. So that's that. But John Buscema came into the office and said, "You got any Westerns?" Because he liked what Savage Tales was about. He said, "I really want to draw a Western. You got any Westerns?" Well, Larry only had this one that he didn't like, that he would not assign to John Severin. So he gave it to Buscema and paid me for it, paid me for the script. And Buscema drew it. It's a beautiful job, beautiful job. But from that point on, John would ask for me, which that's pretty humbling for Mr. Buscema to ask for me. He said that he liked what I did. Now, was I elevating his artwork? I don't think I can really elevate John Buscema's artwork, but maybe if you look at the stories, maybe there's something that shows that he really dug drawing the story. I mean, that's an elevation right there. When I did this arc on the Punisher, Barbarian with a Gun, it was only a 3-issue arc because we thought Buscema was going to get dragged away, because that's what happens when you work with hot artists. You can't count on them for long because the company's going to want to drag them away to do something better or hotter. And Marvel never saw Punisher as that big a deal. Why are we wasting talent on this? So I kept expecting John to be pulled away. So did Don Daly, my editor. And so I wrote a 3-issue arc. Well, Buscema comes in halfway through the third one. He would bring pages in and deliver them. And he says to Don, can this story go on a couple more issues? So if you read this, it's kind of like one story starts and then another story begins in the middle of it. But I did. I stretched it to 5 parts because why wouldn't I? I got to work with John Buscema. And then when I submitted the script for Punisher, A Man Called Frank, I had pitched it to Don, and we pitched it to Tom DeFalco, and Tom DeFalco said, go down to marketing and see if they can sell it. And I went down, I talked to Lou Bank in marketing, and he goes, yeah, I can sell that. Punisher Western, yeah. Prestige format, let's go for it. So we wanted John Severin, he was busy. We wanted Russ Heath, he was busy. Next choice, John Buscema, and John Buscema loved doing it. And then from that point on, he kept asking Don if there were any scripts by me. So I got to do a Punisher Annual, and I think a couple of other things. But I got to work with John Buscema. Now, was I elevating his artwork? No, but I think it's clear if you look at him, he dug drawing these. He dug drawing this stuff. He liked my stuff, which I guess enhanced me more than him. But that's the thing, especially with guys who were like, the older pros. As talented as they are, they get in a rut, or they reuse the same stuff, or they don't feel particularly appreciated. They don't get as excited about the work. I think John Buscema was looking for things he felt like drawing, that he wanted to draw. And that was it. Now, another story was Russ Heath. Russ Heath, probably my favorite comic artist of all time. And I got to work with him quite a bit. I was blessed to get to work with Russ on quite a few stories. And Don Daly was going to assign him an issue of the Nom, but he was worried. And he knew what a big fan of Russ I was. So he called me and he says, I want to assign this to Russ, and I know you're really a big Russ fan, because I had been pushing for Russ to write something for Russ. Because he's doing quite a bit of work at Marvel on Punisher and stuff like that. And I said, he said, but I'm worried he's just going to phone it in or whatever, or he's not going to care. And I said, well, Don, get him excited. Get him excited. I tell him he can do one of those covers like he used to do in the 60s, with the washes and, kind of like a painted cover. Let him do the coloring and tell him, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that primo late 50s, early 60s war cover. And this is what he did. And he drew the issue. It's one of my favorite things I've ever written in the final product. Because he didn't phone it in, and he didn't look tired, and he looked like he was into it. The cover got him going, because the cover had to be done first. And the cover kind of got his juices flowing. So did I enhance his art? I don't know, but between Don and I think we inspired him, to do his best work. I mean, he's a consummate professional and everything else. Russ Heath, John Buscema, guys like that, they're consummate professionals. But if you're a professional creator, if it's writing or filmmaking or whatever, you've got to invest yourself to do your best work. And I guess part of my job is to get the artists to invest themselves. I mean, part of my job is to invest myself in what I'm writing. If I can't, I won't write it. But artists a lot of times don't have a choice, and they end up having to draw things that they didn't want to draw, particularly when you're starting out. You get to draw a bunch of crap. It's like, I have no interest in this character at all, but I have to do it. If I want to be a professional, if I want a career, if I want to move on to bigger and better things, got to pay my dues, and everybody's got to do that, right? Harold Pridemore. How about a history lesson on the Heap? Only thing I remember is he snapped Misery's arm. Yeah, I liked writing that scene. The Heap. The Heap was the first swamp creature in comics. And, the first shambling mockery of humanity, all that purple prose that goes along with him. And he starts out life in Airboy as a character in a lead Airboy story. And he's so popular, I assume they got letters. I mean, how else would they know how popular it was? Maybe issues sold better the month Heap showed up. I don't know. But he continued on as a backup feature for most of Airboy's run. A lot of times drawn by Carmen Infantino. And, he kind of fit Airboy. Airboy's kind of a weird comic. It's kind of a weird franchise because it has these supernatural and horror elements mixed in with what is ostensibly a World War II aviation adventure. And it sold well. Airboy was a big selling comic in its day. It sold millions of copies a month. Very, very popular. And, the Heap kind of fits in here. And he was well known enough. Mad did a satire on the Heap, which is hysterically funny if you ever get to see it. Kurtzman and Will Elder. And so the Heap is a fiction. In fact, when I got assigned to write Airboy comics, I remember one of my sisters said, "Oh, you're going to have the Heap in it?" And she was 7 years older than me. And she remembered reading the Heap from the comics from the 50s and all the way through the 50s. Because even after Hillman stopped publication, when the Comics Code came along, Hillman said, no more for us. We're out of here. We're going to just go back to printing crossword puzzle books. This book sold so well that there were like ready copies throughout the 50s, just sort of, at barbershops and laying around on people's coffee tables, because, there were millions of copies out there, and this was post World War II paper drive. So a lot of people knew who Airboy was. You can see movies from the early 50s that actually reference Airboy. He was kind of a big deal, and the Heap was part of that. And like I said, the first, before Swamp Thing, before Man Thing, before all the rest of them, before Muck Monster, or what was that one? Was it Morlock, or I can't remember, Bog Beast at Atlas. Before all of them was the Heap, and he was just sort of I don't even remember if there's an origin. I know I wrote the character, and I don't know if there was an origin. But he was well known and apparently well loved. Skywald brought him back in the 60s for a couple of their books. Skywald was it was run by some people, Marvel expatriates, and it was kind of faux Marvel line that ran for a while with Western war titles, and a whole bunch of horror titles. And the Heap was one of them, often drawn by Tom Sutton. So the Heap lived on into the 60s, and then of course in the 80s I revived the character when I took over Airboy. Heap had to be a part of the mix, and I kind of portrayed him as an eco warrior. He was Mother Nature's revenge on all of us for pollution and all the rest of it, and that's the way I played him. But fun character. So I don't know what that nose is. It's a great look, but I don't know what's going on there. Hippopotamus. How do you think an adventure with both Batman and James Bond would turn out? I know he had a crossover with the Man from U.N.C.L.E. at one point. It's a comic book based on the 1960s Batman show that crossed over with them. Although I don't think Batman ever had a crossover with James Bond before. I can see maybe an adversarial type encounter. James Bond is pretty much the ultimate alpha male, probably wouldn't be intimidated by Batman or anyone. And naturally, Batman wouldn't be a pushover either because he's Batman. I kind of thought this would be a fun story to imagine. Yeah, it would. It would. And I can see these two not getting along at all. I mean, Bond would see Batman as kind of a freak. And of course, Batman wouldn't approve of Bond's license to kill, or is just his general habits. You know, smoking, drinking, chasing the gals. So it'd be a cool story with Bond on like a, you know, super secret mission to take down Ra's al Ghul or something, and you know, Batman's there to interfere or whatever. Because, you know, Bond's just going to put a bullet in Ra's al Ghul's head if he gets a chance. And Batman's not. Batman don't play that. So, yeah, it'd be a cool story. I'd write that in a heartbeat. Be a lot of fun. David Jordan. Captain Planet decides he's going to go total war on pollution, so naturally goes to war with China and India and is smeared in the press as a horrible racist monster. Yeah, I brought up Captain Planet as a character I would never write, but then changed my mind, you know, right then and there in a heartbeat and said, yeah, maybe I would want to write it if I were given free reign to basically mock Captain Planet. And I like your idea. I like your idea of Captain Planet doing something that gets him canceled. I also like the idea that he'd potentially be dealing with nuclear Armageddon caused by himself. Yes, that's that. Doing something that to save the environment ends up destroying the world. That would be a lot of fun. So, oh yeah, Alex Sheikman, seeing Bane and Levon in a movie, in movie theaters made me wonder, if you had your wish, what would be the next intellectual property you'd like to see on the big screen or the TV screen? Well, I got a bunch of them, but something big is something that I think would. You got to think what's going to lend itself to the screen and be marketable. Something big. The concept of a science fiction heist story. Everybody loves a heist story. A lot of people like science fiction. We all dig a good alien invasion story, and I think this had enough. This story's got a lot of heart. I think it's got a bunch of characters that you get interested in. I think it's unusually plotted, like it's differently plotted enough, so this story doesn't feel like the same old thing all the time, and the characters have built-in backgrounds and all that. I just think this would really click. Plus, Frank Fosco, you could just take his art and you got your storyboards done already. Frank did all your work for you. Plus something big, as I'm told by people that are actually looking at this. You know what that means. They're looking at it. I'm doing air quotes here. They like it because it reads like a movie. And the reason for that wasn't really intentional on the part of me and Frank, but the reason for that is it started as a web comic to be read digitally. And of course, in my mind, that was something different than a comic book page. And so we did tell it more storyboard style, more cinematic, almost slideshow version of a story. And but I think it would lend itself well. The other one, the Iron Ghost, and I've had a few people show interest in this, continued interest. Iron Ghost is a pulp vigilante type character in the final days of World War II, and he's hunting down. He's going to make sure that a bunch of Nazis who did bad things don't escape, that they don't get away to, live in a estancia in Bolivia. He's going to knock them off before they get out of Berlin with the Russians closing in. And I just love to see this on the big screen. And with all, this like things like Sisu and other movies, this renewed interest in World War II in Europe. I think this could play. I mean, this could play as a miniseries or a feature, and I'd like to see it. The other one, Cannibal Gold, the first book in the Bad Time series, and of course the Bad Time series as a whole, I think would make a good TV series, like for streaming. It's time travel. It's military guys. It's a real basic concept, but it's military guys going back in time to right wrongs, correct mistakes, and they have to correct mistakes. There's an overriding villain of the series who is out to alter history to create an alternate world that he can rule, and so it's got a big arching story, but each of the novels is a self-contained adventure of their own, and I think it would make a hell of a series. It'd be expensive to produce, but I wrote Cannibal Gold, so the start of the series, if it was going to be made, start of the book series, it was going to be made into a film franchise, or it was going to be made into a TV show. The first book's not that expensive to film. It's not as expensive as the later ones would be. In my mind, it's like, well, if this one's a hit and a moneymaker, then it funds the rest. So you would, as they always do, you spend more money on the sequel or more money on the following episodes. So that was my thinking anyway. We'll see how that works out. David Jordan again. I'm sorry I didn't give you a twin spin. What are some of the best American Western comics? Well, let's go back to the late 40s, early 50s. There was a comic called Prize Western. It was published by Prize Comics, and it featured American Eagle. American Eagle was a backup feature that took over the lead feature. And American Eagle was, I can't remember the name of it. Was it Cal Dawkins wrote it, I believe? And John Severin penciled it with Will Elder on inks. This is before they got to EC Comics, where they would work together and separately. And American Eagle, as you might imagine, is about a Plains Indian, a Sioux Indian, and he's the hero of the story, and he's just trying to make peace amongst the tribes and trying to intercede between the white man and the red man to stop the bloodshed in the American West. And it's unusual because it ran for quite a while, ran for quite a few years with the same creative team on it the whole time. And I think largely this is because Severin, who did other Western characters for Prize, but never one as successful as this, is Severin's interest in the period and everything else. And that shows in the level of accuracy, the level of research that John Severin did. He was a history buff. He loved Westerns, and he loved showing them the way they should be. So there's a real consistent level of quality to this series that you didn't find very much in the Golden Age period. But it's a great American Western. Another one is The Lone Ranger from Dell Comics. Tom Gill drew The Lone Ranger for 11 years. Every month. Sold millions and millions of copies. Paul S. Newman wrote all of them, and they are fun reads. If you like The Lone Ranger, you'll love this stuff. It's really good, solid, beautifully drawn Western comics with, again, like John Severin, a great degree of accuracy, as much accuracy as you could put in a story like this. And of course, these frickin' wonderful covers that Dell commissioned, these wonderful painted covers by some top illustrators of the day. I have I think a near complete run of Tom Gill's Lone Ranger that I initially just started buying for the covers, and then I started reading them, and I started buying Tom Gill originals. And I really appreciate the guy. He has a very idiosyncratic style, but he was a terrific storyteller, and obviously had a great love for the Lone Ranger, because 11 years is a long time to stay on a comic. Now, one of the sad things for me is that EC, they did some Western stories in Two-Fisted Tales, and they were all uniformly excellent. But EC, in its heyday, never did a Western comic. Like they did a war comic, and they did horror comics, and they did science fiction comics. And I really wish they had. I really wish they had done an EC level Western with, Wally Wood and Jack Davis and John Severin and George Evans, the terrific stable of artists they had working on Westerns. If you ever get to read this one, it's in an issue of Two-Fisted Tales, written by Harvey Kurtzman, drawn by Jack Davis. It's called Betsy, and it's just a hell of a story. Another great comic from the 50s that also featured a Native American lead was Arrowhead from Atlas. And this is back in the day. I mean, there's a lot of frou-frou and nonsense about American Western fiction and movies and TV shows, and there wasn't enough respect shown to Native Americans. Well, that's from people that don't know what the hell they're talking about. If you watch, Hollywood's output, and you look at the comics and novels and TV shows and things at the time, the American Indian was cool, and kids dug American Indians. There were a lot of Western titles that featured Native American lead characters. I mean, Tonto had his own comic. There was Arrowhead. There was Dell had a long-running title just called Indian Chief. So there were a lot of different ones, and Arrowhead is good. I think Hank Chapman wrote a lot of these stories, and they're drawn by Joe Sinnott. Now, if you're watching this, you might have said, "Hey, that's Russ Heath." No, it's Joe Sinnott. Joe Sinnott was he did some amazing stuff at Atlas in the 50s in the war and Western area. And this is a great book. And he didn't run long. I think it ran like 5 issues. And but he drew every Arrowhead story, and they're just wonderful. And he was every bit as interested in remaining accurate. I loved his backgrounds. He would have these desert backgrounds and stuff. They were very, very well done and very well thought out. But these are terrific stories, and I think one of the best American Western comics ever produced, even though it wasn't around very long. Now, of course, Jonah Hex, which I was introduced to through Tony DeZuniga's artwork. I guess early 70s, 70, 71. I'm guessing. I don't look this stuff up beforehand. Not a lot of prep goes into this, as all of you can probably attest. But DC dips its toe in the water with Westerns. Marvel never stopped printing and reprinting Western comics, and they always did well with them, though they were often not that great. They weren't really great Western comics, but there was an audience for it, so they produced them. Well, DC hadn't done any Westerns since the Hopalong Cassidy got canceled, or they canceled All-Star Western. So they return with this weird Western tales. Now, when I bought this, I remember 6 months earlier, DC put out a couple of short-lived Western titles. There was a arc in Showcase of Jonah Hex, or not Jonah Hex, of Firehair. It was a Native American character, even though he was a white kid. By Joe Kubert. They had done Batlash, which I bought and I liked, and they did they began to do these 25-cent collections of stuff from All-Star Western and Tomahawk. It's Tomahawk, long-running title. So I guess they did have a long-running Western title. Tomahawk, ran into the early 70s. So anyway, they decide to get serious about it, and they, make weird Western tales because they're having so much success with weird war tales. And the word weird was, you could use the word weird. The Comics Authority would allow you to use they wouldn't let you use the word horror or terror, but weird was okay. So DC leaned into weird big time, and apparently paid off because these titles sold very well. And when they introduced Jonah Hex, who was initially a tryout character in Weird Western, people obviously responded to it, And Jonah Hex ran for years, often drawn by Tony DeZuniga, but some great stories by Garcia Lopez, Jose Delbo, E.R. Cruz, a lot of great talent. And the thing is, a lot of times they used Filipino artists on these Jonah Hexes, but the Filipinos, they didn't understand American war stories, but they understood Westerns. So the Western work's terrific. I mean, fantastic illustrators, but they just did not get American war stories. And why would they? But they did. Westerns are a universal thing. Everybody understands what a Western's about, what it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to feel like. And they did some killer work on this stuff. Yeah, Jonah Hex run with Michael Fleischer, John Albano initially, and Michael Fleischer. These are some really cool stories, and it was a very, very successful title for DC Comics. Hey, speaking of comics, me and Joe Bennett, who I mentioned before, we got Horseman 2 out. It's out for pre-order from Rippaverse. Now, pre-order usually means it's not done yet, but it's done. It's sitting in their warehouse waiting to come to you when the campaign is over, because that's how Rippaverse rolls. This isn't a crowdfunding thing where you got to wait a year or never to see the product. It's done. It's finished. In fact, I've written through Horseman 5. We got Alpha Core 2 and 3 and 4 in the bag. I mean, me and Joe are rolling. My job at Rippaverse is to keep Joe busy, and I couldn't be happier. I want to keep the dude busy because he's an awesome talent, incredibly prolific artist. I don't think he sleeps. I think it's that Brazilian coffee. So anyway, check it out. There'll be a link below the video. And if you want to get a hold of me with these terrific questions and controversies, you just want to get a hold of me and make me change my mind about something by presenting me with facts, you can reach me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com. And I want to thank you all for listening, watching, subscribing, sharing, liking, whatever you've done, and especially for the terrific questions. I enjoy this. I enjoy answering them, and I will see you all, I hope, with more questions, and I'll have more answers down the road.